Bonsoir à tous. Good evening, everyone. I'm Margaret Furrow. I'm president of the Métis Nation of Ontario. Welcome to this evening's event. And I want to start by begin this event by asking Marie-Louise Perron, a knowledge holder here in Ottawa, to come and lead us in an opening prayer.
Tanjikiwa. Bon après-midi. For those who don't know me, my name is Marie-Louise Perron. I'm the daughter of Virginie Schnei of Saskatchewan, Gérard Perron of North Dakota, granddaughter of Pierre Perron of Quebec, Selina Ledirut of Red River, Manitoba, great-granddaughter of Jean-Baptiste Ledirut of Red River, and Marguerite Saint-Arnaud of Northwest Territories. So I'm from everywhere. Today I wear this sash, which is the Ledirut family sash, to honor my ancestors, my Métis ancestors, for their standing with Riel in the first resistance of Manitoba. And I also wear it for you, my relatives, because that's what we are talking here about. We are talking about supporting our relatives and standing with each other in times of trouble and celebrating with each other in times of good times. I'm enormously grateful for the Creator to have given me this day on this beautiful earth, do good in the world. I thank Grandfather Sun for the warmth and the light that he provides. Grandmother Moon for regulating the waters and shining in the night sky and keeping the balance between the day and the night. To the stars, where we came from and where we will return. To our Mother the Earth, who gives us everything, absolutely everything that we need, not only to survive, but to thrive. And to all our relatives, the four-leggeds, the winged ones, the swimmers, the creepers, the crawlers, the insects, the medicines, and then, speaking of the insects, even the mosquitoes, to whom we pay a blood sacrifice without knowing what their purpose on the world is. To these and all creation, seen and unseen, I give gratitude to the Creator. Merci, miigwech.
Merci, Marie-Louise. Thank you so much for getting us started in such a beautiful way tonight. And it's been a while since I thought about mosquitoes, so thank you for that as well. It's a wonderful evening, and I know that these are very busy times. We're approaching the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on Saturday, and I want to say on behalf of our leadership, and we have some of our Provisional Council members in the room, our Chair, Hank Rowlandson, Mitch Case, Regional Councillor for the Huron-Superior Regional Community, and we also have leadership from our Ottawa Regional Métis community, Eric Joss as president, and others who serve on their council and are citizens within this community. And we also have national Métis Nation leadership here. We have our national president who's going to be coming and speaking in a few minutes, but also leadership from the Métis Nation Saskatchewan, the Métis Nation of Alberta, and the Métis Nation British Columbia, and of course, all of you that are coming to spend an evening talking about a very important issue, and that is Métis survivors of residential, boarding, industrial, and day schools, which is a story that, as you may or may not know, has not yet been told in this country. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission devoted an entire chapter to this issue to say that the story of Métis survivors has yet to be told, that we have yet to have a process, a TRC-type process for those survivors, that we have yet to have any compensation for those survivors, that we have yet to have justice for those survivors. And we are delighted to be joined this evening as well by our national interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves, Kimberly Murray, as well as leadership from the Métis Nation Saskatchewan, Vice President Michelle Leclerc, and Dwayne Favel, who is not just the mayor of Île-à-la-Crosse, but an intergenerational school survivor from the Isle X, as you'll see, Île-à-la-Crosse Métis boarding school. This is part of the story that we're going to be telling tonight, and I think it's thanks to the mad genius of Métis filmmaker Matt LeMay and his crew. We have a short documentary that we're going to be sharing about Île-à-la-Crosse School. And we're going to be hearing from Michelle and Dwayne. We're going to be hearing from Kim as well. And setting the context and moderating for us tonight is Mitch Case, who has done a tremendous amount of work on this issue. And Mitch and Cassidy and others were all part of that Métis Nation delegation to Rome, but also so many in this room, part of the Pope's visit to Canada last year, and working directly with survivors to ensure those stories are told. This is one of those undone pieces when we're talking about reconciliation. It is one of those undone pieces. And obviously, we've got a lot of work to do still on reconciliation. We're going to be talking about that a lot more this evening when it comes to residential school survivors. We also have a lot of work to do in terms of reconciliation within and among our own nations. And that's work that is timely and important. So this evening, I want to just take this opportunity on behalf of our leadership and our citizens to welcome everybody. I hope that you have the opportunity to learn and grow from this evening. And ultimately, from where I sit, that National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is not a holiday. It's a work day for all of us, for all Canadians. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping people will take away from this evening is a stronger understanding of some Métis survivors' stories and a sense of what you can do, each of you can do, to advance that work and to call for justice. And of course, I will be remiss if I don't also acknowledge our founding president, Tony Belcourt, who's with us at the back of the room, and it's wonderful to have you, Tony, with us. So with that, I'm going to introduce our national president, Cassidy Caron, and ask her to come up and say a few words of greeting. Cassidy.
Thank you, President Fro. Tansei Kiowa, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. First and foremost, I'm grateful to be living and working here on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory and doing this work in our nation's capital in friendship with those who have been the stewards of this land from time immemorial. It's wonderful that we've all joined here tonight. I know we're a few days ahead of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, but many people are really using this entire week these days to start educating themselves, telling the stories, refreshing their minds on this ever so important topic before the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which will take place on Saturday. I'm grateful that we're spending the time tonight to start talking more about the Métis-specific stories on Métis experiences with residential schools. And I'm grateful that we have folks in the room who are friends and allies to continue fighting for truth, justice, healing, and reconciliation. And we can't have reconciliation within the Métis Nation until there is the truth that has been needing to be told for many generations. We can't have reconciliation until there is justice for Métis residential school survivors, and we can't have reconciliation until there is healing for those Métis survivors of residential schools as well. And so I want to thank everybody for being here and thank Matt for capturing these stories, but really thank the survivors themselves for sharing their stories. And the survivors from Île-à-la-Crosse, I've had the absolute honor and privilege of getting to know over the last couple of years. And every single time I have the opportunity to sit with one of these survivors, these elders of these communities, their stories continue to move me. And their perseverance and their resilience on this issue is something that I've never seen in an individual before. They are fighting for justice for themselves, but for future generations as well. This story needs to be told, and there needs to be justice served for these individuals before they pass. Residential schools, of course, affected many people, First Nations, Inuit, but it also affected Métis people. And that story has really not surfaced as much as it needs to. These institutions are really the only learning institutions in the world where students come out and the graduates are actually labeled as survivors. These are the only institutions where these students are labeled as survivors, and that is something to be said. I will be heading to Île-à-la-Crosse tomorrow, and after our meeting and spending National Day for Truth and Reconciliation alongside the survivors, to let them know that the Métis National Council stands with them, to bring hopefully all of your support to them as well, to let them know the work that I'm very fortunate to get to do alongside Vice President Michelle Leclerc, and support the work that she's leading in Saskatchewan on this ever so important file. And of course, Mayor Dwayne Favel, to be able to be there just for that support, because I know that that matters to them, and I know that bringing their stories then to the national capital to share with parliamentarians, to share with senators, is going to start to make a difference. But we have so much work yet to do. This is part of sharing our stories. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for participating in the film screening tonight, and then really listening to the stories of the work that the special interlocutor Kimberly Murray is doing, the work that Vice President Michelle Leclerc is doing at the Métis Nation Saskatchewan, and of course Dwayne, for all of the hard work that you have done and continue to do for your community, your family, and all of your relatives. So thank you everyone for being here tonight, and I'm so grateful for all of you.
Thank you for offering that land acknowledgement. I was remiss in not acknowledging we're on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. It's my pleasure to introduce Mitch Case, who is the Regional Councillor for the Huron-Superior Métis community here in Ontario. I'm going to ask Mitch to actually explain a little bit about who he is. And Mitch is going to be our moderator this evening. He's going to help to set some of the context around those untold stories of Métis residential school survivors before we screen the documentary itself. And he'll be here to help moderate the conversation that follows. For those of you that are in the room, as Mitch is coming up, for those of you that are watching online and joining us, we hope you enjoy the evening. Merci.
Well, good evening, everyone. I don't have too much to say because it's not one of those occasions where you need to hear from politicians. It's one of those occasions where we need to hear from survivors. And so I just want to just set a little bit of context, though, for who's this guy. So for about 10 years or more, I worked in various capacities at Algoma University and Shingwak Kinamagigimik, which operates in the building of the former Shingwak Residential School, which is the school one of my grandmothers went to. And so I had over 10 years as a student and as an employee there and a director, whatever, an opportunity to work with survivors who, at least to my knowledge, and I say this, it is to my knowledge, I could be wrong, but the survivors of the Shingwak Residential School are the oldest active residential school survivors organization in Canada. They started organizing as a group in about 1971-72, and they hosted their first gathering, what they call their reunions, to bring themselves and their families together in 1980. and they now host those every summer. And so they're the ones who sort of raised me to talk about these things and how to listen to these conversations and how to, how to make space, as the kids would say, for survivors who are sharing their stories. And so I just want to ask everybody here, as you're hearing the stories that are shared tonight on the documentary, take time to take that in, to reflect on that, reflect on how that impacts you personally, how that impacts your family, your community, and then reflect on the fact that, as has been stated by Justice McLaughlin, by the TRC, by the Holy Father, what happened in this country was a genocide. Full stop. And there are survivors of that genocide still being ignored for reasons that no one seems to be able to explain. And it's just unacceptable. And so I want to just really encourage you as you're watching the film. And I don't know where Matt. Oh, he's at my table. He's right there. I really want to credit Matt, as I haven't really been around in any of the work that Matt's been doing with the survivors in Île-à-la-Crosse, but having done 10 years of work with survivors at home, I've seen people show up with a camera and want to get people's, catch people's tragedy on film so they can, go and make a name for themselves. And it's really troubling. And then you see somebody like Matt who does this work because he cares about it, does this work because he has a skill that he thinks he can bring to telling the story for those survivors. And so kudos to you, Matt, for doing that work in a good way. So yeah, as you, I don't know who I give the high sign to, but that guy. We're gonna get queued up here, and then when we're done, I'll invite the panelists up and we'll do intros and bios and all that sort of stuff. So thank you.
Île-à-Crosse is the second oldest community in Western Canada. It will be, in 2026, 250 years old. The Île-à-Crosse Residential School is one of the oldest schools in Canada. So when you think about that and you put it into context, over 100 years and 6 to 7 generations of harm in that school. And it didn't just affect Île-à-Crosse. You look to our communities in Northwest Saskatchewan and you see the harm. You see the suicides. You see the abuse of drugs and alcohol. You see beautiful, beautiful communities, but you see the loss of language, the loss of culture, the grieving for the land. That was as a result of this residential school that has not been acknowledged.
Recorded history of Île-à-Crosse dates back to 1776. So we have a long history within this community. Arguably, I think we have one of the oldest residential schools in the country. I think, the school here, I believe, started within the, the mid-1800s. Saskatchewan didn't become a province until 1905, and then the residential school was here already. It was inherited at some point by the provincial government, and they continued running the school until it closed in the early 1970s. Because we're a Métis community, and we're a Métis, it was considered a Métis residential school, we don't have closure to this one. Government continues to failed to recognize, that this school existed, and it was a residential school, and students from around the region were coerced or forcibly, brought to Île-à-la-Crosse.
The rules were no different than what the Indian residential school. Because Beauval is right next door to us. And Beauval, I know that for a fact, a lot of our survivors actually went to both places. And same thing with supervisors, they exchanged supervisors from Beauval. Beauval got recognized, we didn't. And so the agenda was the same. Take the child, take the culture out of the child. That's the agenda.
I mean, this has been an ongoing conversation for decades. And when I worked with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we heard this over and over again around how the Île-à-Crosse boarding school was not included in the settlement agreement. The commissioners of the TRC said this is a barrier to reconciliation, that these survivors are not being treated equally or fairly, and that needs to happen before we can further reconciliation in this country. And so here we are, we fast forward, it's, how many years since the TRC issued its final report, 7, 8 years now, and we're still in that situation. And for us to have full reparations for reconciliation, the Île-à-Crosse boarding school needs to be recognized, and these survivors need to be compensated.
Île-à-Crosse is the people. It's those that live here, those that have been here, and those that come home to Île-à-Crosse. It's a place we call home. It's loving, it's kind, but it does have its pains and its sorrows.
Once we were inside the institution, everything changed for us. We lost our names. We were never called by name. We had a number. My number was number 44. 44? I had to remember that number. If I didn't, then there was consequences to deal with. And that was a constant thing in there. The language, the number, and how you behaved. We were little savages, right? When we went in there. Take the savage away from us and try to make us a little bit more human, I guess.
So they came in, and their impact was to change us, to change our way of thinking about Kisimanitu, or God. They wanted us to believe what they believed. We lost our parents back then. Our parents lost their children, and so a lot of them became alcoholics. Thank God there was no drugs those days, but there was a lot of alcohol that went around the community. That impacted all of us, my parents, my brothers, myself.
It was hard because they gave us numbers. They didn't know our name. And so my number was 66. We had a little box, it wasn't, we call them lockers now, but it was like a locker, and our number written there, and that's where we kept our clothes. That's where everything that we owned was inside that box. And I used to like going to school. I wanted to learn, but not to be treated mean and beat up or screamed at all the time inside the boarding school.
We couldn't talk our language, and that was all we knew, the Michif language, and you couldn't even say tanse. We get strapped, every day we get strapped if you talk your language.
My grandkids, when they come over, I always hug them and tell them I love them, because 10 months of the year, I never heard I loved you. There's always something else. And I never really knew my family, my mom and dad, because of boarding school.
We got nothing to play with in the yard. Not even a ball, not even a football or anything. We never went to town or anything. We don't buy nothing. We never get out of the yard. This is a true story. It's just like jail, where I went to school.
I was abused at one time, but I was so young that in my mind I tried to figure out what actually happened. It's like I had suppressed it for so long that I can't even make a figure of who it was. There was a lot of different things that I figured that from that on, after I had that sexual abuse, my mind was not really where it's supposed to be. Because when a child goes through that, it just destroys your whole body, your whole mind, and your soul. But there was so much anger that you felt like you want to retaliate even to your friend that's the same age as you. You were always angry and wanted to hurt somebody.
When the Pope came to Edmonton, I don't travel, by the way, because of my fear. I said to myself, now if I were to travel, would I really truly go and see this man? I thought about that for quite a while, and I said, you know what, I wouldn't. But I did sit at home and I listened to him on TV. And when he was talking about the abuses that were done to the kids in the boarding school or in the residential school, he was talking about psychological, emotional, physical. And I was waiting, sexual. He never said it. And I just went like this, and I said to my husband, Louis, I said, damn, all of what he says means nothing to me. He did not acknowledge that those priests and those nuns and those Catholic priests and nuns that were supposed to be helping these little babies, these little children, he did not say that they were inappropriate, that they were sexually abusing them. Didn't utter those words at all.
The apology was something that many survivors needed in their own personal healing journeys. Our visit to Rome, as well as the papal visit here in Canada, played a significant role in amplifying the voices and the experiences of Métis residential school survivors, stories that often don't get told in Canadian history or even in mainstream media. And so we've taken steps forward in making sure that people understand that Métis did go to residential school and that there is still so much more work to do. However, in actual, like I say, tangible actions towards justice, we still have a lot of work to do.
Any outside agency that doesn't understand identity, culture, values, and language are not going to be able to give proper support. Kispinigunan kikagtap mechik, kaguwichi hiwichik, muins tuhta mogtan sininanis matsia, muingas tautawichi huako. That's what I said in English and Cree. In regards to, we need the true support based on who we are as Métis people and First Nations people. That our communities, our elders are important. But if you give from the status quo perspective in regards to giving money, then the expectations are not what they should be based on our identity, culture, values, and language.
bringing people back to the land and bringing people back to those teachings that come from the land. And with that comes, language revitalization and connection to identity and who we are, right? Because anywhere you talk about residential schools in Canada, even around the world, you can look at this, where people are displaced for land, which equals money, natural resources, which equals money. That is the biggest factor that every government, every power that be is leaving out. Because, right, when we talk about compensation, the impact of culture and heritage, they don't want to talk about land, because that is the ultimate shift of power. And I think that is the biggest missing piece that we need to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really important, I think, for the survivors of Île-à-la-Crosse is that my mandate includes more than the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement schools. That's how I interpret it. And so I want to make sure that survivors know that I'm here to help them and to hear from them and deliver their messages to the people that need to hear their messages. So one of the things I think most Canadians don't know is that these burials and the missing children aren't just at the 145 Indian residential schools under the settlement agreement. They're at these other institutions that weren't recognized. They're at hospitals, Indian hospitals. They're at mental health institutions, reformatories, all these institutions that were also operated by provinces. And so we need provinces and territories to commit to reconciliation and do what they need to do to release records to survivors and come to the table for have those conversations about what does reparations look like. And that needs to happen today. We can't wait 10, 20 more years. It needs to happen today.
We need healing. We need lodges. We need healing lodges all over the north and in urban settings as well. We need more detoxes. We need more rehabs. We need our ceremonies back. A lot of healing comes from ceremonies, so we need sweats. We need just all of our traditional medicines back and all of that stuff to come back.
The time has come for Canadians to be able to see the damage that has been done to Indigenous people. The time has come to be able to speak as that one voice and be supportive of one another. When individuals win, communities win, and big cities win, provinces win, Canada wins, everybody's a winner. But we need to respect each other, understand the circumstances where we're at, and hopefully together, this can never happen again, but we need to fix it and have the right supports in place.
Immediately, what we need to see is actual recognition from the provincial government in Saskatchewan and the Canadian federal government that Île-à-la-Crosse boarding school was a residential school, and that the harms that were done to almost 7 generations of Métis children and First Nations children at that institution happened, and that their stories are true, and that it's the same harm that was done through the Indian residential school system. And so without that recognition, we can't move forward in our healing journey. We can't move forward with reconciliation. We need that recognition from both the federal government and the provincial government together to move that justice piece forward.
We need to get this done sooner than later. We know that the youngest survivors are in their 50s, mid-50s, and the oldest survivors are 97, 98 years old. And so we've been losing survivors almost on a weekly basis. In the last year, we've lost, I think it's getting up to about 30 in the last year. So it is so vitally important that we get this done as soon as possible. And I would hope that the province and Canada believe that it's not just a legal obligation, but it's a moral and ethical obligation.
think we need another round of applause for those survivors who. A lot of you know me. I get mad a lot. I don't get emotional a lot. And that, kind of wish I'd seen it before, actually, before agreeing to chair this. Anyway, so I'm going to ask Michelle and Dwayne and Kim to come on up and find a spot up here at the head table here. As everybody's coming up, I just think it's really I think knowing what we know about residential schools, knowing what we know about what happened in those institutions, there's a whole lot of people that are deceased now that while they were alive were guilty of crimes. But I would go so far as to say that anyone who now knows what happened and is actively protecting them is also guilty. And that goes right across the street to that House of Parliament, to the House in Saskatchewan, to the Prime Minister's office, to the Minister's office, to everyone knows. We all know what happened. It's not unclear. There's no guessing. But here we are. This is the reality of our country, that we continue to deny justice to survivors. And so I think there's a lot to think about there. So now that they've all found their seats up here and got their waters and got all settled, I want to introduce our panel and our speakers this evening. And I think we'll go in this order because of the note I was given. But I want to introduce Kim Murray. Kim is Kanesatake Mohawk and is was the first Assistant Deputy Minister or Assistant Attorney General for Indigenous Justice in the province of Ontario, went on to become the Executive Director of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and then was called upon to lead the work at the Special Interlocutor's Office. You should fix that word. But at the Special Interlocutor's Office for unmarked graves and missing children. And so I want to thank you, Kim, for taking time to be here and for having the courage to speak up for Métis survivors who are often forgot even by other survivors and forgot by others who are doing this advocacy work. So I want to thank you for that. The next of our speakers is Vice President Michelle Leclerc from Métis Nation Saskatchewan. Michelle's been involved in Métis politics, back to the Charlottetown Accord when we almost found justice once, and then that was snatched away from us. And then went on to do a lot of work in the legal field, representing Indigenous women in the criminal justice system, representing Métis rights cases, and then I think got tired of working with Métis politicians and decided to become one again, and is the Vice President of Métis Nation Saskatchewan and holds a few portfolios there in the Métis government in Saskatchewan. And Dwayne Fable, who you saw in the film. Dwayne's a survivor from the Île-à-la-Crosse Residential School, is a real, I think the only thing tougher than municipal politics is Métis politics, and he's involved in both of those things in his 5th term as the mayor of Île-à-la-Crosse. And so, as Métis people, we know that we're never afraid to step up and do work where work needs to be done. And so he does that work in his community. And then, along with other survivors, stepped up to lead the class action lawsuit against the governments and the church for their failure on this issue. So I think we'll start with you, Kim, and we'll work our way down.
Thank you, Mitch, for that kind introduction. Sego, Seguego, Skinagoa, Kimberly Murray, and Yatskanya Gahaga, Ni Inig, Ganasitake, Wakwaho. I just introduced myself in Mohawk and told you that I'm a member of Ganasatake Mohawk Nation and that I'm Wolf Clan. I want to start off, as I always do, for following protocol, to acknowledge that we're on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Nation, and I recognize that Ottawa has been and continues to be the home for many Métis, First Nation, and Inuit. I want to say now a thank you, Marcy, to Knowledge Keeper Marie-Louise Perron for her opening words and her opening thanksgiving to all of creation. And in the ways of my people, we give thanks to all of creation when we have important meetings to bring our minds together as one. And I thank her for doing that. There you are. I'm scanning the room looking for you, and there you are. So thank you for doing that. Thank you to my good friend, President Fro, for inviting me to share some words with you tonight on this, very important occasion, and for allowing me to be here as you screened this important film that Matt took such great care of telling the stories and the experiences of the survivors. It was an honor to be here to see that. I also acknowledge the messages delivered by both President Fro and President Caron on the importance of what needs to be done for reconciliation. And I stand with all of you. It's long overdue, and I am of like mind with you, with everyone, that we need to get this issue resolved and survivors recognized and all these institutions recognized. I also acknowledge all the Métis leaders that are here from across Turtle Island. It's so wonderful that you're all able to come to Ottawa for this gathering. But most of all, I want to acknowledge survivors and their family members of survivors that are here today. I acknowledge that the families and communities across the country who are leading the work of recovering the children. It is sacred work that's happening looking for the children. And it's important and needs to be done to bring honor, respect, and dignity to the bodies and the spirits of the little ones that were never returned home. As you know, the Truth and Reconciliation called for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And they called for this day so that we could honor survivors, their families and communities, and ensure public commemoration of the history and legacy of the residential school system. The TRC emphasized that the day is a vital step in the reconciliation process. And now here we are approaching our third National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, happening on September 30th. But I also know that this day is an important day, but it also is a day that can cause different emotions for survivors and communities. The TRC said that the process of remembering the past is an emotional journey of contradictory feelings, of loss and resilience, anger and acceptance, denial and remorse, shame and pride, and of despair and hope. But I know that the reminders of the past are also coupled with hope for the future, and hope that maybe Canada and Canadians are finally seeing and hearing survivors, all survivors. With the difficult memories and feelings that this upcoming day brings, it also creates an opportunity for all Canadians to pause and take the time to learn and to understand more about the legacy and ongoing impact of the system. It is a day of truth, and we heard truths when we just watched this film. And many of you are aware of the difficult truths that survivors hold and have shared about their experience at the genocidal institutions, including the horrible truths about the existence of unmarked burials. It is about truth, and the truth is there are likely unmarked burials on the lands associated with every former residential boarding school across this country. This includes the institutions recognized under the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement and those institutions not recognized under that agreement. We know that Métis children were sent to these institutions. That is the truth, and that is the truth that Canadians need to hear. We also know that Métis children were sent to many other places where they died, including the hospitals, reformatories, training schools, boarding schools, TB sanatoria, industrial schools, and mental health asylums. Before I came here today, I did a quick search of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation's database. It holds over 5 million documents that the Truth and Reconciliation collected during its work, records collected from the federal government and church entities. I ran the word Métis and the formerly used derogatory and racist term half-breed. Over 45,000 records came up. There is no denying that Métis children were at these institutions. Volume 3 of the TRC final report focused on the Métis experience. They noted that the existing records make it impossible to know for certain how many Métis children were taken to the institutions. But they did attend almost every single institution that the TRC discusses in its report. The TRC noted that Métis children had the same experience, as we heard from the survivors in the film, as First Nations children and Inuit. They had a high death rates, limited diets, crowded and unsanitary living conditions, harsh discipline, heavy workloads, and experienced neglect and abuse. Métis children were used by the churches to maximize enrollment at the institutions and to collect per diem fees for their maintenance from federal, provincial, and sometimes even parents. The TRC said that the Métis experience in these institutions has been overlooked for far too long. They said there is no denying that the harm done to the children, their parents, and the Métis communities was substantial, in that it is, and I quote, an ongoing shame that this damage has not been addressed and rectified. Call to Action 29 directed Canada to work collaboratively with those not included in the settlement agreement to resolve the outstanding claims. This call to action was issued over 8 years ago. And yet, as we've heard, Métis survivors are still waiting to be recognized and to be provided with proper reparations. It's simply unacceptable. Simply unacceptable. Survivors are dying and they're aging. Families are hurting. For there to be reconciliation in this country, Canada must correct this shameful situation. The finger pointing between levels of government must end. Canada knew Métis children were at these institutions. Canada paid for many of the Métis children to be taken there. And for those that Canada didn't pay for, they certainly did nothing to protect the children from being taken there, even when they knew harms were happening in the institutions. Articles 11, 8, and 40 of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, which Canada signed on to, mandates the state, Canada, to provide proper, effective mechanisms for redress, including restitution. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission said that reconciliation is about establishing and maintaining mutually respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And in order for that to happen, 4 things have to occur. First, there has to be awareness of the past. There has to then be acknowledgement of the harm that has been inflicted. There has to be atonement for the causes, and there has to be action to change behavior. None of these 4 steps have been taken by Canada when it comes to the Métis experience in the residential institutions. And I urge everyone on September 30th to reflect on this and determine what you can do to change this. I just want to speak a little bit about public memory and the importance of public memory. The TRC said that we have to reshape our national history and reflect its complex truth so that our children's children and their children will know what happened, as they are the ones that will inherit the responsibility to ensure that it never happens again. And so I ask Canadians to move from their head to their heart, to consider and feel for the families who are grieving for all that was lost and can never be recovered, to feel with their hearts the pain that survivors and communities leading the sacred work of recovering the children are experiencing as they have to step back into their trauma to find and honor these children. We need to honor all the children that were taken to these institutions and their families. We need to honor and acknowledge those for whom a history of injustice and oppression is still very much alive. I can't leave this conversation today without speaking about my mandate as the independent special interlocutor. I did not pick that title for missing children and unmarked burials. In the first year of my 2-year mandate, I met with hundreds of survivors, attended dozens of communities, walked the grounds of more burial sites and cemeteries than any one person should ever have to walk. I held 4 national gatherings and released an interim report. My interim report identifies 12 common concerns that survivors and communities are having as they do the work to find the missing children. I ask everyone here to read the full interim report and do what you can to address the 48 findings that I issued in it. And one important thing that we can all do in this room is to help put an end to denialism. Many international experts point out that denialism is the last step in the genocide. Deny that it happened. Denialism is violence. Denialism is calculated. It is harmful. It is hate, and it should be treated as such. There is a core group of Canadians that continue to defend the residential school system. They deny that children suffered physical, sexual, psychological, cultural, and spiritual abuses, despite the indisputable evidence of survivors. Others try to deny and minimize the destructive impacts of the institutions and call the recovery of burials as fake news. The burden of countering this denialism should not rest with survivors or communities searching for missing children, or on those who are attempting to heal from the trauma that was inflicted. Denialism is a non-Indigenous problem, and therefore it's non-Indigenous people that have to address it. The government of Canada and the churches must step up. I have said that they can no longer be bystanders in reconciliation. Canadians cannot take pride in a country that permits the burials of children to be violently disrespected, allows shovels to dig into the bones of our ancestors, and hides or allows the truth to be distorted. They must also stop being bystanders to the hate. Article 15 of the UN Declaration states that Indigenous people have the right to the dignity and diversity of their histories, which shall be appropriately reflected in education and public information. And it tells states to take effective measures to combat prejudice and to eliminate discrimination and promote tolerance and good relations. Canada has an international obligation to combat this denialism and to ensure that education and public information reflects the truth about missing children and unmarked graves. Canada has the truth. They have the evidence. They hold the photos of burials. They have records that prove that kids died. They have invoices that they paid to have coffins made and graves dug. It is on Canada's shoulders. They must act, and they must put a stop to the hate and the violence. Communities are in crisis, and they must be given the resources to allow them to heal in their own ways without being re-victimized and attacked by the growing movement of denialism. I want to close by saying merci, merci, now I thank you to each of you that are here. You made the important decision to participate tonight and to hear Métis people's truths, and it tells me that you care, that you want to make a difference, that you accept and acknowledge that more action is needed to recognize and respect Métis survivors, their families and communities, and to honor the spirits of the Métis children that were never returned home. Last year on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, I reminded people that the TRC said that there is an urgent need in Canada to develop historically literate citizens who understand why and how the past is relevant in their own lives and for the future of the country. I know that each of you is reflecting on how you can support Métis survivors, families, and communities, and I know that each of you will make a personal and professional commitment to support the sacred work that communities are doing so that each and every missing child can be found and their spirits can finally rest with their ancestors. I'm going to just end with this quote from the TRC. They said, "Together, Canadians must do more than just talk about reconciliation. We must learn how to practice it in our everyday lives. Canadians from all walks of life are responsible for taking action. Reconciliation begins with each and every one of us." So thank you very much. Merci. Nawe.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Of course, I have Dwayne Fable here with me. I want to thank the elder for her beautiful words and opening up this in such a good way. Also acknowledging the unsurrendered and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. I feel like I should have gone before Kim. Now I got nothing to say. So this work with Île-à-la-Crosse has been ongoing for many, many years, and I have been fortunate enough to work with the survivors just the last couple of years, and I think we've made tremendous gains, and I want to thank Matt and your team for taking such care making this short documentary. I just want to mention that one of the I don't even know if I'm not going to go there right now because I'm going to cry. So one of the things that we've been looking at in Saskatchewan as a Métis Nation is not just Île-à-la-Crosse, but the Métis experience in residential schools, and we've actually have a resolution to create a commission, hopefully paid by through Canada and Saskatchewan. But we did go to Indian residential schools. Saskatchewan had 20 Indian residential schools throughout Saskatchewan, and our children went there too. And I think that's something that people tend to forget. They think Indian residential schools, well, only First Nations children or Inuit kids in the north went. But we did, and there was a map when the documentary just started about where Beauval was and where Île-à-la-Crosse. It looked like a long ways, but it's less than an hour away from each other. And our kids, whether they were Métis or First Nations in Île-à-la-Crosse in that region, did go to school in Beauval, and they came back and went to school in Île-à-la-Crosse. And Louis Gardner in the film was talking about, they actually shared the same priests, nuns, administrators, caretakers, you name it. They went back and forth. So one, of course, was recognized and the other wasn't. And Kim's done a fabulous job in her role and mentioning the Métis experience. Thank you for that. All of these institutions, many of them, orphanages, sanatoriums, mental health facilities, you name it. That's where they sent our kids. Convents. A lot of kids from Île-à-la-Crosse actually went to, the girls went to a convent in Manitoba. None of these have been recognized. And I'm not going to talk much longer because I want Dwayne as a survivor to speak. I just lost my train of thought. Our government of Saskatchewan will not come to the table. Kim was talking about denialism. Our government of Saskatchewan is denying that they had any impact whatsoever in or activity with respect to Île-à-Crosse. We know for a fact that that's not true. I mean, Île-à-Crosse ran from the mid-1800s, I think it was 1840-something, 45, to 1974. And so one of our challenges has been the provincial government. We're making movement with the federal government. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. I was just going to say that we did lose one of our survivors that was in the film, Lawrence Morin, and 2 weeks ago. And then today we lost John Desjardins, which was, I think, the brother of the Desjardins that was in the film. So it's on a daily, weekly basis that we're losing our survivors. So I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne. Oh, Dwayne's going to go up there. Thanks for being here.
Okay, tanse kakiwait nao kitamskat nao kinaskumt nao kakiwa no sutaga pitagohtig anistamen an miuhtin no sute pitagohtian. So Marcine toan ista ipiwisamgo ya no suta. So just like to welcome everyone. I think I'd just like to start by giving Matt one more nice round of applause for the wonderful work that he's done. It's such important work, you know, for the survivors of Île-à-la-Crosse, and I don't even know what's on our agenda for Saturday in Île-à-la-Crosse when we have our ceremony. It's a full day ceremony, but this would be a wonderful way to start that ceremony, is presenting, you know, the documentary that Matt put together with Île-à-Crosse boarding school survivors. So we'll try and get that done. Yeah, so you know, you heard in the video, Île-à-la-Crosse is arguably one of the oldest communities in Western Canada. You know, recorded history dates back to 1776. And of course, the school in Île-à-la-Crosse, you know, was put there in the mid-1800s for sure, and arguably one of the oldest residential schools in Canada. Saskatchewan didn't become a province until 1905, and Treaty 10 was signed in Île-à-la-Crosse in 1906. So, you know, the history of Île-à-la-Crosse, there's an awful lot there. Louis Riel, you know, we're a proud Métis historical community, and Louis Riel Sr. was actually born in Île-à-Crosse in 1817. And his daughter, Louis Riel's sister, Margaret Sarah Riel, came to Île-à-Crosse as a Grey Nun and was stationed there, I believe, in 1871 until her passing in 1883. And her final resting place is Île-à-Crosse. So, you know, as a Métis community, there's a lot of history and lots of ties with the Red River in Manitoba and Lac La Biche in Alberta, actually. So a lot of connections, family connections exist. So yeah, and I just want to say that, I'm absolutely proud, to be in a room with such powerful, influential voices. And I'm really delighted that, that you're our allies, you're supporting us. And, and it's so important, for the survivors of Île-à-la-Crosse, and you've heard of just a few of them on the documentary, in terms of how important, that the Île-à-la-Crosse Residential School gets settled. In terms of compensation, we talk about truth and reconciliation. We as Métis community, we celebrate, with our First Nations brothers and sisters when it comes to truth and reconciliation, and we're so proud, that they have a process, that they can use and go through, to find a healing, that we all truly deserve. But for us, the truth, our truth, hasn't been heard yet, hasn't been accepted. So our path to reconciliation is still not there for the survivors of Île-à-Crosse. And, until the day that the government acknowledges, that the Métis students of Île-à-Crosse went through the same type of harms and atrocities, that other residential schools across Canada went through, until that time comes, I don't think that there's a real path, to healing for the survivors of Île-à-Crosse. They've done a lot. They've done a lot of work on their own. We have generations of people who have attended that school. And, our elders continue to share and tell their stories, and some of them with great difficulty. And, it's so important that we continue to support the Île-à-Crosse residential schools. And I've met so many, such strong voices, eloquent voices, throughout the last 2-3 years, as part of this journey, and the willingness, to support and advocate on behalf of the survivors is unbelievable to me, right across the country. And we thank, of course, Kimberly Murray, who's been a great advocate, Cassidy Caron, our national president, and of course the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, who's, Michelle Leclerc has this file, and she wants to see this this issue, addressed, as part of her term as vice president of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. So so Saturday, we continue to do our ceremonies. We continue to advocate, as a community of Île-à-Crosse, and we continue to ask people, to advocate on our behalf. So. With that, I just want to say that, man, I hope this, this documentary is seen by a lot of people who need to see it. It's no use when we're speaking to the converted all the time. We need to get to the people who really need to hear it, who really need to see it, and make those changes that are going to address this issue once and for all. So with that, thank you for listening, Merci. Thank you very much.
Earlier, I lost my train of thought. I remember what I was gonna tell you. So in Île-à-Crosse, with the community of Île-à-Crosse, we are starting the work around ground penetrating work. And so, part of that is working with our elders. There's so many stories, and we were involved in English River had done some work in the Beauval Residential School, and I was involved with them for some of that. And one of the really, really important pieces was the stories from the elders. So they would say, tell a story, and you've got to go there because I know that there's a kid there, or, whatever. And so that work is starting in Île-à-Crosse as well. So that was another thing I wanted to just mention. Well, I guess both Kim and Dwayne had talked about a call to action, and we would ask all of you to, as Dwayne said, help us advocate, speak to people, make a call to action on resolving Île-à-Crosse. And Kim said it earlier, and I agree 100%. We can't have reconciliation, and not just for Île-à-Crosse survivors, but for Canadians. We cannot have reconciliation until Île-à-Crosse and every single Indigenous school, all of these institutions are recognized, and that the harm that we've experienced is acknowledged. And so I'll turn it over to Dwayne to help me with the call to action.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Michelle. Yeah, and I think, we hear a lot of, calls to action, especially with Marie Sinclair's, 904 recommendations, there's such strong, statements, but how many of them have actually been, actualized, I guess you could say, across the country. And so I guess, when we hear people speak, and rightfully so, we need meaningful action from here on in. And what does meaningful action look like? And then we have to have a conversation around that statement as well. Because I think, those actions need to be almost co-developed, and sitting down with First Nations, Métis people, and figuring out, what does meaningful mean, as we move forward? So when we talk about, the call to actions, it has to be, we have to be included as Indigenous people. And for the residential school in Île-à-Crosse, we always say that, the government needs to sit down. We've been calling the provincial and the federal government to the table. The federal government won't sit down with us because, the issues in the courts, and the provincial government won't come and sit down with us because, it's in the courts. So, we're blocked either way. So, and thirdly, we had a law firm in Saskatchewan, merchant law firm, who's had this file for over 17 years. He's failed to get the class action certified. All the survivors in Île-à-Crosse figured this class action was going forward, it was certified, and that we were, close, to getting a settlement. And last year, the survivors found out that, merchant hadn't done any work on this file. It wasn't certified, and he wasn't going to certify it until he worked on another Métis residential school case that he was going to, hinge his efforts on in terms of, and then revisiting Île-à-Crosse. So we just went to court on August 2nd to have merchant law firm removed, from our class action. And we have a firm from Toronto, Waddell Phillips, is now representing the Île-à-Crosse Residential School. And merchant, get this, now it's taking us to court so he can hang on to the lawsuit after having done nothing in 17 years. And the federal government won't come to the table until we get rid of one of the law firms. Well, we're not going to get rid of the one we just hired. They've actually done more work in the last 6 months than merchant did in 17 years. So, and they continue to work hard on our behalf. So every time the survivors of Île-à-Crosse, which you heard here, just a few voices. I know Matt probably has tons and tons of footage, in terms of, I know there was a lot of footage in Batoche, with Mark Miller present, and, and some of their responses, I'm glad you have them on recorded in terms of, we've been hitting obstacles, in terms of, everywhere we turn, there's an obstacle, and we just say, like as Métis people, it's not only this issue, it's issues, it's all issues, we seem to have challenges and, met with obstacles with every time we try and move forward and do good things for our people and for the country, for that matter. So I'll leave it at that. Merci.
I just wanted to, when we think about the call to action, I know many of you met with the new Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations today, and I had my first meeting with him, and I did raise the Île-à-la-Crosse, and he told me it was one of the files he's fully briefed on, which is, he has a lot of files to be briefed on. But what I've been saying about the situation, because Minister Miller, when he was the Minister of Cernak, said to me when I was chasing him about this file, he said, well, we can't let Saskatchewan off the hook. And so it's like Canada's hiding behind the province, and the province is hiding, well, just avoiding everything. And so I said to the minister today, I think you need to take a Jordan's principle approach to this, because survivors are dying every day. Do the right thing, Canada, and resolve this matter, and go fight with Saskatchewan on your own and get your money back, or however you feel. But resolve it.
This is my opinion and not an official opinion of the Métis Nation of Ontario, but I don't believe in hell, but there's a lot of people who could be on that list if I did. I think it is so troubling. I remember in 2011, we were out in Saskatoon, and the Métis National Council had brought together, this was back when I was young, and a bunch of youth and survivors. And one of the survivors talked about not only the trauma from having gone to that school, particularly the Île-à-la-Crosse school, but the re-traumatization of her sister, who had gone to Beauval, being apologized to, compensated, provided counseling, all those other things that came through the incredibly flawed settlement agreement, but was there. And the re-traumatization, because to be told it happened to you and it was wrong, it happened to you and we're okay with it. We don't care. We just don't care. There's no other words for it. And I want to thank Michelle and Kim for your work advocating, in those political spaces, in those bureaucratic spaces that are an absolute nightmare. And I think a round of applause for these two women who are doing incredible work. But even more so, and with all the love I have, Dwayne, to you and to the other survivors, for just not giving up, for knowing that you matter, right? For not ever giving up on yourself or your community, right? And please, extend that to everyone back home, because it is as horrifying as it is to think about all of these things. It's also, I try to think of it as an inspiration that, how powerful these survivors are to have never given up. So as we begin to sort of wind down our evening, I want to invite, for a lot of folks here are local Ottawa folks, and so I want to invite for a few moments our founding president, Tony Belcourt, who's leading a project here in the National Capital Region, to share a few words about that project, and then we'll invite my wonderful friend Mary Louise up to close us out in a good way with a closing prayer.
Thank you very much for allowing me to give a plug for Utinichik. which in Cree means taken. This an event taking place at Wabano Aboriginal Health Center on Friday. It started out with a portrait painter, portrait artist, who came to me and asked me what she could do with these paintings that she had done after she had taken, when the Kamloops revelations came forward, and she was just so compelled, she started painting these pictures that she took off the internet. And one thing led to another. We decided, I said, well, it would be nice to have an exhibit, but we should do interviews with every one of the people that might be in that kind of an, and it just grew from there. We got other people became involved, and where we are now is we're launching the idea of a traveling multimedia installation. Purpose of which is to create more awareness about the issues, to keep this in the public eye, to try to have the public understand what's going on, to help bring about change in policies. And the whole idea is to provide support to the survivors and the families of those who were taken through the Indian Residential School legacy, through boarding schools, day schools, children that have been taken by failed child welfare policies. Our people have been taken through the 60s scoop. There have been settlements, but as we all know, those settlements they're not complete with everyone. They should be completed. So the idea is, let's get the word out there to try to bring about some change. Those of you who know about this traveling installation called Walking with My Sisters, my daughter Christy started that whole idea, and it traveled for 7 years. The unfinished moccasins, tops of children who had died, who were taken. And that had influence and was part of the whole thing that brought about the Commission on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. We sort of think that that kind of thing, if it got off the ground, could also have an impact in Canada. So we're having the launch of this concept. Some of the exhibits are going to be there. I see that Lorna Dancy and Elder Pearl Sandor, who I just saw come in from Alberta. Métis Nation of Alberta has supported them to come down here. And at our event, we'll also have representatives of the 60 Scoop Network and Peta Irnik, a well-spoken survivor. We just want to get the discussion going. We want to launch this idea. Does it make sense? Do other people want to come on board? I will tell you that we've had a soft launch of this, and we have just a minuscule little grant that we got from Heritage to allow us to pay for some of the costs of putting this on. We had a soft launch of it, and we've had about 300 people who have responded and said they want to come. We can barely accommodate about 150. So we're very fortunate. We just got word from Nation Talk that they're going to live stream this. And thanks also a great deal of this to the support from the Métis Nation of Ontario. So thank you for giving me this plug. Those of you who are going to be in town, well, we've got a waiting list, but if you get hold of me somehow, we'll make sure we find some room for you. Thank you very much for letting me talk about it. Oh, by the way, the event is at Wabano, 299. If you've never been there, it's an incredible place. The Aboriginal, Wabano Aboriginal Health Center, 299 Montreal Road, and from 10 till noon on Friday, we're going to have self-guided tours. We have a lot of these multimedia installations and so on, and this incredible piece of art that Lorna has brought. So that's from 10 till noon, and from noon until 3, we're going to have the presentations and a discussion. And then after that, from 3 till 5, we'll have some more self-guided tours. Once again, I want to thank you, President Fro, for the support that the Métis Nation of Ontario has generously offered so that we can have this thing live streamed, because it means we be able to reach out to a lot of people we want to know. Are portrait artists, do you want to be involved? Do communities want to have this kind of thing in their community? We want to connect with survivor organizations. We want to connect with all other organizations that are working in the same field to say, can we get together and make something like this happen? Merci.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. We're going to clear the stage because we're all really awkward and uncomfortable with everyone staring at us, and so we're going to ask Mary Louise to come up and offer a closing prayer. As Mary Louise makes her way up here, I just want to thank everyone for taking time to come out here. I don't know what the plan is for the documentary now, going out into the world, but as it makes its way out there, share that with your friends, share that with your family, share that with your colleagues, everyone else. The story of Métis Residential School survivors absolutely needs to be told. Thank you.
I wanted to say a word about Thanksgiving to all creation. I do that because I grew up in a village that was not home. It was racist. It was people threw rocks at us on the street. I thought it was because we were Francophone, because I didn't even know we were Métis at the time. When I finally found out we were Métis, my village still did not feel like home, but what did feel like home was the land. The land was my home, and when I was on the land, I felt at home, and I felt nourished, and I felt loved. That's what I want for all the survivors, to feel at home, to feel loved, and all of those who did not return. they as well should feel at home and loved by all of us. And therefore, all of us as relatives, it's our pledge to all of the survivors and all of the little ones who didn't make it home. I ask Creator to see us all safely home. And I keep all of you in my prayers, and I hope that you all will keep each other in your prayers as well. Merci miigwech.